thoughtful ideas, suggestions for guests and topics.
Events, programs, and student faculty.
All the factors are useful.
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us for the first time here for HCC TV Dialogue Houston, we're here now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. and on Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, on top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, texts, and subjects and issues to be covered on the coming up shows, and particularly those that you've enjoyed in the past. This is your community affairs, public affairs show here on HCC TV, proudly beginning its 28th year. We want to make sure that we cover things that you are interested in, and we have a lot to talk about in the new year. Yes, I've heard from you very clearly. You all want 2020 to go away. You'll be glad when it's gone, but it has brought us the opportunity in the post-George Floyd reality to begin to have some honest conversations. And it was hard to have those conversations at any time, but particularly it was hard during this time of COVID-19. But we prevailed. And people had time on their hands to think, to reflect, to meditate, some to even pray about what they really felt about the issues around policing, around young African-American males, about implicit bias, and all the racial issues we've been trying not to talk about or not having a conversation in this country for all these years. It forced some of that dialogue. And to our credit, we have begun across this city to begin to look at different issues. Many organizations, corporations, nonprofits, business community have all formed racial equity task force and are really beginning to really look at this issue in depth. We're going to have some of those guests on in the new year on Dialogue Houston. In fact, most of Dialogue Houston will be spent particularly the first quarter of the new year around this issue of racial equity. What does it look like, talk like, feel like, act like, walk like? What are those things that we still must do and address? And there are many forefronts and many people in the fight in the forefront of this effort. One I'm proud to have on as a guest today. She's a great friend of ours here at Dialogue Houston. She's worked with us on many projects over the years. She is an attorney, a lawyer, a civil rights activist, a civil rights lawyer, a writer, an author, and has recently led a course as a professor at Rice University's Baker School this fall semester. And I love this title, America's Derivative Sin, Racial Implicit Bias, which is held at the Baker College. She is none other than Fran-Victoria Stevens. And so welcome, Fran. So great to have you here.
So great being here again, Larry. And I love how long the pauses were between each of the words, giving it the gravitas that it deserves.
Yeah, okay. We'll have that discussion again later. I know where she's headed with that. So, Fran, I think you responded, the university responded, people you were in contact with responded in the fall of this semester. So timely, starting in September, this course, this class that you taught, it couldn't have come at a more interesting time, particularly for the students on that campus, to be able to avail themselves of this kind of dialogue and discussion. Tell us about the history and the genre of why this course and class was put together, and then tell us a little bit about what happened at the class.
It's really ironic and pretty precarious the way that these relationships were built between myself and Dr. Gottberg with Baker College, and this burgeoning need to discuss and address racial implicit bias. I actually, while I was on maternity leave, I was reading Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. This was in December and January. And I started really rooting myself in this understanding of how we absolutely cannot trust our gut. our gut is merely a product of our experiential insight. And our experiences, unfortunately, are just pregnant with bias. So when I really started thinking about that, and what the next project I would be embarking upon would be, and in August, Dr. Gottberg and Angela Dano, we all started talking about what we wanted to bring to Rice in the fall semester, and that's how the lecture series began. It was 4 weeks, from October to November 11th was actually the last date. And it couldn't have been, like you said, at a more pertinent time than now, when we are being forced, just the levees of time, right, are bursting at the seams. They're just, willing us to address what we think about our fellow American.
And in that course, with the young students at Rice, young being relative here, because some are actually a little older, I think, what was their response to having the opportunity to actually have a class like this at such a pregnant time in our history, to be able to have a place to share, to talk, to be honest, to express their feelings, to be present with their commitments in the room and to express those commitments?
Well, Larry, I think it's important to unfold how this is, the title of the class is a claim, right? It's a statement that I had to ensure the class was able to substantiate intellectually. And let me say that a little bit more clearly. In saying that America's derivative sin is racial implicit bias, there's some things that I kind of had to unpack for the students, so that there was a sense of agreement across the class. The first thing is understanding who the sin was against, right? Or rather, what institution this sin of racial implicit bias was against. And so the foundation of that claim is democracy. And understanding Thomas Davidson, philosopher from the latter part of the 19th century, he was sort of at the forefront of understanding that democracy is a religion. There are elements of democracy that mimic a religion, and how we worship democracy, how we elevate democracy above humanity, even, because it seems so, it seems as if it is the apotheosis of political organizations in America's view. So that was the first thing that we had to do. And the students really digested this, that democracy in America holds a religiosity to Americans. And because of that faithfulness that we have to this political organization, democracy, we have to uphold it as if it is something to be worshiped or revered. The second part of that claim was understanding the word derivative. That derivative actually means that there's something that preceded it. So what was the original sin? So the next thing that they really had to digest and understand was that slavery was the original sin, and now we're dealing with what I call a sloppy second-handed sin, which is racial implicit bias. And surprisingly, I thought going into this course that, into the lecture series, that each segment, as it built upon the preceding segment, that the students would maybe grapple with the claims the sub claims that are being made in the broader claim that America's derivative sin is racial implicit bias. But they understood very well. The students at Rice and the students that attended the lecture series were open-minded, were ready to discuss the heady objective that was at task in this lecture series, which was understanding how we unveil our biases so that we are honest about what we are actually seeing in our fellow Americans, which is humanity.
Well, in that humanity that has taken such a beating this year, and democracy itself has been undercut with undercurrents of dictatorship, we are in the process now of trying to come out of this pre and post reality, which we're not over yet. We're in the throes of the 78 days from election day to January 20th of the swearing in of the new president. And as we see unfolded every single day, a new twist and turn to people not wanting to accept nor believe nor follow the Constitution in a way that we've never seen in this country in the peaceful transfer of power from one elected president to the next.
Yeah.
So your whole treatise of democracy being seen as a religion and understood as a religion has basically been thrown out of the window. And so how do we rebuild that sense of trust, because it's really about trust, and those relationships built on mutual trust and respect, to begin to talk about where do we go collectively for our collective future together?
Democracy, what I wanted the students who attended the lecture series to really understand was something that Barack Obama said during John Lewis's funeral, as he eulogized John Lewis. Barack Obama, our 44th president, really laid out this impetus that we are in a more perfect union, right? That democracy is elastic, right? That we are always stretching it farther and farther. That each generation finds itself on the continuum of history and must ask itself, how can I contribute to this novel, abstract, theoretical idea of democracy? And so when I talked to the students who attended the lecture series, it was important for me to help them understand how novel this idea of democracy really was in the 18th century, that we would have a government that was for the people, that was by the people. And I think that that's what these people who call themselves patriots don't really understand. The origin of that word patriot was an antithesis to loyalist, right? The patriot was actually saying, you know, I believe that there's something more than just revering one person, because that's what we call a monarchy.
Right.
Right. And we decided that America would be a democracy, not a monarchy. And so these people who are calling themselves patriots and are saying that they are somehow more patriotic because they are loyal to what looks more like a monarchy or the Trump era, are unfortunately, they are in a state of contradiction and ignorant to what the real root of a patriot really is.
But you know, I totally agree with you, what you just said. But you know, our tendencies, our proclivities to deal with issues when it comes to understanding what civility is, what civic is, and what civil is are very, very tenuous. Because the inclination has so much to do with how I have experienced things. And my limited daily experiential realities.
Yeah.
I then shape everything that I believe, think, and feel about you. And if my dealings with civility has always been an us and them, never a we and us, or even more selfish, an I and me, let alone a we and us, then when you talk about government and you talk about democracies and you talk about humanity, you talk about civility, all those things I've learned, particularly in this last year, and I've learned directly from chairing the mayor's task force on policing reform, that all those terms and things that we think are endeared to us as citizens mean different things to different people.
Yeah.
And I'm always have to remind myself that the word civility comes from the Latin word civis, which is Latin for citizen. So we have never properly understood our role as a citizen in a democracy. And you and I have talked about this, right?
Yeah.
And I'll say this and I'll turn it back to you. We have never realized and been able to appreciate that there are 5 tenets of what it means to be a citizen living in a democracy. We love to talk about those 2 first ones, my individual rights and privileges, because who that's about. It's all about.
Yeah.
They say it's about you, but it's really not about me. What about the other 3 of the 5, which are our common duties, obligations, and responsibilities? To whom? The other. Define the other increasingly in our society, someone that does not look like me, someone different than me, the other. That's the we and us. We have never, even before Trump, even long before Trump, we have never figured out how to get to we and us.
Right.
What Trump saw was that vacuum, that void between the I and me and the we and us people, and jumped right in the middle and created a larger chasm. So now the incoming administration has to not only undo those 4 years, it has to go back even pre-Obama in his 8 years, because there was, we all use this phrase because it's so true. There would be no Trump had there not been an Obama. All right, it's very, very true. It's a backlash.
Yeah.
So now going forward, and the man is talking about running again in 2024. So in these precious next 4 years, how do you see, and for the sake of time, I'm going to push this, how do you see those issues being dealt with? Forget Washington for a moment. What are we going to do locally in Houston?
Yeah.
What can we do locally in Houston?
Yeah, I first want to address something that you said about having these conversations, right, that are so
Important.
difficult. Yeah, and they're relevant and they are very difficult. I have a very good friend who voted for Trump twice. She is my very best friend from college. We lived together. And one thing I wanted my students who were largely, Biden supporters, I wanted them to understand the concept of a marketplace of ideas. And this is something that I think America has really gotten away from. This we gravitate more towards the cancel culture, right? That's a real hot button topic now, the cancel culture. And this marketplace of ideas is something that I think is so rich and tangential to the prosperity of democracy. If we are not able to discuss with one another how we feel about the way we think our government should be run, then we are in a very, very scary place. My best friend and I have opposing views. I am of the federalist ideology, as we would call it in constitutional law. She does not believe that the government should be involved in the lives of Americans, that is the responsibility of the American, that Americans have been given the freedom to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and figure out how to navigate their way to success. I am in complete opposition to that. But the fact that we are able to have these sometimes blistering conversations, and at the end of those conversations, I can say, give Philip and Alexander a hug from their godmother, and she can say, send me a picture of Journey, Haven, and Bliss, my daughters, and I can say, I love you, and I can't wait to talk to you again. That is the fundamental concept of the marketplace of ideas. Because what happens at the end of that time in the marketplace is that I understand what opposing views are even present. I think that we have villainized those people who do not look like us, those people who do not think like us, and that's a very, very serious threat. That is a red level threat to democracy and how we continue to perfect democracy. And that is essentially our place on the continuum, our place on history's continuum. Our generation must determine how we add a block to democracy as we continue to build it.
You know, we didn't have this problem a few years ago when everybody knew their place, and white privilege was the call of the day. But so much has changed now. And the demographic shift in this country has made a lot of this really on shaky grounds now. Some people knew it was coming. They expected it. Our wonderful Dr. Stephen Kleinberg here in Houston kept telling us that it was coming. A lot of people never saw it or believed them until it happened. So now that we're a majority-minority city, that plays into this, and the majority-minority state and nation pretty soon. And so people of color, of all things, this us against them mentality of who's the majority, who's the minority, plays into this.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that plays into this is the failure and the breakdown of the urban public school system and the resegregation of schools again, along, yes, we can say along economic lines, but it still ends up being racial lines also.
Yeah.
And the third factor, I think, is that we have gotten so far away from understanding how the 3 C's that you mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, of what it means to be a citizen, a congregant, a citizen, a congregant, and a constituent. We have abdicated all 3 of those roles to a small factor, both the left and the right, of vocal people. The silent majority in the middle, those who have been bystanders, those who have chosen not to get involved because let somebody else do it for me, have now realized they have to get back in the game.
Yeah.
And I think it's though that realization of the training that is necessary to be an active player back in the game, to understand what is at stake to be an active player back in the game, comes now at the time where we must do a series of education, series of workshops, of training, so that people will first be willing to do their internal work, their own personal internal work first, then enter into a community of others who have done their work together and understand how we build. That seems to me the only hope we have going forward. When you have a 50-50 split in the nation, right down the middle, almost on anything.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to do some real, as you said, real dialogue, real conversations to build up mutual trust and respect again, build relationships to build mutual trust and respect again, because nothing happens without trust. While you and your best friend can disagree on some social, economic, political thing and still, of course, be loving, close, nurturing friends, is because you built up that relationship of all these years built on mutual trust and respect. I know she knows you're going to have her back. You know she's going to have your. So, and we got about a minute left. So give me your best future ball shot of what the new year is going to look like.
Well, I'm really hopeful. I'm always an idealist, but rooted in realism. And so I think that 2021 is going to be reflective of the year. All right, we have a year that is followed by real valleys, right? And so we're on, to use the words from a rap song, we're on the way up. We've
Yep.
hit a bottom, and we've gotten the coronavirus vaccine, and I think that people are ready to turn away from what I call monochromacy. That's a term in optometry that means color blindness,
All right.
and address where we are, and finally put the commitment in to building that block of democracy that will reflect our place on the continuum of history, our place as Americans.
I'm going to stop you there because that is a good pause to end as a hopeful thought for the future. Let me see if I can sum up real quick a little bit with Fran and I's conversation and kind of the context in which this whole discussion has set this afternoon. It is about the test of our collective humanity. The notion that God sides with conservatives or liberal, no. Just because you want it to be that way, it's not so. I know you know that God is on our side. Our side is humanity. Humanity has no sides. And so this idea of good people, bad people, good human beings, bad human beings, deserving human beings, non-deserving human beings, it's not the way it works. Our common human experience, our common destiny, our common humanity. In fact, if we're honest with ourselves, we're all afraid of the dark. We must be the light for each other. The darkness during this pandemic and political reality, and now this post-George Floyd and hopefully post-Donald Trump reality, is spreading light to give hope, to give empathy, to give care, to be the kind of people we know we can be and rise to the occasion. That which continues to grind and tear at the soul must give strength and courage and allow us to turn outward after we've done our own internal work inwardly. Because we know that in a few weeks yet to go forward, in this intense next few weeks, we must be vigilant. We must understand that there is a lot of craziness that's going to happen in these next few weeks. And we must be on our guard to make sure we are not contributing to it, but we're also trying to help people get through it. It is the journey through. We're in the middle passage. We're in the time in between. The founders of our Constitution could have never foreseen the huge demographic shifts in the 223 years since the Constitution was created. Our task going forward is to cut through the misinformation and disinformation, move to a place of understanding, as Fran said, and dialogue with each other and develop those relationships of mutual trust and respect. Bring together the huge divide. Going forward, we can and must do this because what? In fact, we have no option not to do it. Failure is not an option. Coming together is not an option. We cannot go on the way we have gone. We cannot go on as we see played out in the media every single day, whichever media you watch, which is another problem within itself. So we got to go. It's time for me to wrap up. But as we come to this end of this year and we begin to focus on the hope and joy of 2021, let us all realize we have an active role to play, be willing to rise up to the occasion and meet that calling and do what we have to do our part, wherever we are, small, big, and large, stand wherever you are. Show up, stand up, speak up, and follow up. We have to go. So until then, as always, stay well, stay safe, until we see each other again. Peace, power, and love.